Hello, and welcome back to Wild Sanative. As I continued learning the practice of observation, I found myself looking further and further back into my own life. I began reflecting on my childhood, my family, my relationships, the experiences that shaped me, not from a place of blame or resentment, but from a place of curiosity. I wanted to understand how I became who I was. The more I reflected, the more I began seeing patterns that I had never fully recognized before. I grew up with two emotionally unavailable parents and a sibling that was the same. There was very little nurturing, very little emotional connection, if any at all. No hugs, no hearing the words "I love you." What other people thought often seemed more important than how I felt. Comparison was common, control was common, shame was common, blame was common, and anger was common. I learned very early that acceptance felt conditional. I also had very little connection with my sibling. Actually, I had no connection with my sibling, and I still don't. The age difference between us was significant, and much of the relationship felt distant. There was jealousy, competition, anger, and very little understanding, if any at all. As I reflected, I realized that there were many experiences that I once believed were normal that helped shape me in profound ways. I was not encouraged to invite friends over. Actually, I wasn't allowed to have friends over. I did not have birthday parties. I was not asked what activities I wanted to participate in. I was never guided through any spiritual beliefs or practices. And in many ways, I felt alone. Not physically alone, but emotionally alone. And like many children, I adapted. Children always adapt. We learn how to survive the environments we grow up in. The problem is that survival strategies that helped us as children often become limitations as adults. One thing I became determined not to repeat was the emotional distance I experienced growing up. I wanted people to feel loved. I wanted people to feel seen. And I wanted people to know they mattered. But there was another pattern I did repeat, and that was the reactivity. When I felt hurt, I reacted. When I felt attacked, I defended. And when I felt misunderstood, I fought to be understood. This was the world I had been taught to navigate. Stand your ground, fight back, never let anyone disrespect you. And one day, Blanca said something that stayed with me. She said, "Maureen, you need to learn not to be so pierced." At first, I resisted this idea. I remember thinking, why do I need to learn that? Why can't people learn to be kinder? Why can't people learn to be respectful? Why can't people learn compassion? It took me a few years to understand what she meant. She wasn't teaching me to become a pushover. She wasn't teaching me to tolerate abuse. And she was not teaching me to abandon my boundaries. She was teaching me how to not take everything personally. She was teaching me that other people's behavior often reflects their own wounds, fears, conditioning, and ignorance. She was teaching me how to observe before reacting, to pause before defending, from a higher perspective. For someone raised to fight every battle, this was one of the hardest lessons in my life. I had to learn that strength does not always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like creating a boundary, or sometimes it means walking away. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was this. The journey was not only about seeing what had hurt me, it was also learning to look in the mirror, to see my own imperfections, my own follies, my own reactions, my own choices, the places where I had been unconscious, the places where I had caused pain, the places where I needed to take accountability, and that is not easy work, but it's necessary work. Accountability is not about shame. It's about growth. It is about becoming honest enough with yourself to say, I can do better, I can choose differently, and I can respond from a higher place. I believe this is something humanity must learn as a whole, not through judgment or condemning others, but through compassion, honesty, and understanding. Sometimes we are not conscious of our own ignorance until we learn to observe ourselves clearly, honestly, without judgment, excuses, without running away from what we see. One of the greatest gifts the observer gave me was the ability to recognize patterns. Patterns I inherited, patterns I learned, patterns I repeated without realizing I was repeating them. When we grow up in certain environments, we absorb ways of thinking, behaving, reacting, communicating, and relating to what becomes automatic. We rarely question them because they feel normal. They become part of our conditioning, part of our identity, part of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. The observer helps us step back and ask, is this actually true? Is this serving me? Is this helping me create the life and relationships I desire, or am I simply repeating what I was taught? Self-observation is the practice of becoming aware of ourselves without immediately judging what we see. It is learning to watch our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions, our habits, our beliefs, our behaviors, not to shame ourselves, not to criticize ourselves, but to understand ourselves, because we cannot change what we refuse to see. The observer allows us to recognize patterns before they become actions. It allows us to pause before reacting. It allows us to choose a different response. And over time, those new choices create new patterns. New patterns create new outcomes. This is how healing happens. One conscious choice at a time, one observation at a time, one pattern broken at a time. And for me, this became part of learning how to live from the heart center. The heart center is often misunderstood. Living from the heart does not mean becoming weak. It does not mean allowing others to mistreat you. It does not mean sacrificing yourself to keep others comfortable. It does not mean becoming a doormat. And living from the heart means remaining connected to compassion while maintaining self-respect. It means having boundaries. It means speaking truth with kindness. It means standing in your convictions without needing to destroy someone else's spirit. It means recognizing when to engage and when to walk away. It means understanding that forgiveness does not require continued access. It means choosing peace without abandoning yourself. For much of my life, I believed strength meant fighting. The observer taught me that true strength often looks different, and sometimes true strength is a restraint. Sorry, got tongue-tied there. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's boundary. Sometimes it is choosing not to react when every part of you wants to. The observer taught me that being heart-centered and being strong are not opposites. They belong together. Danny taught me this too. No matter how cruel people were to him, he always seemed to return to forgiveness. He always remained connected to his heart in a way that still amazes me. Eventually, he learned to walk away from people who continuously showed him their true colors. He learned to observe. He learned not to participate in environments that lacked kindness, and I have tremendous respect for him because of that. His pain often moved inward. Mine often moved outward. Mine became the warrior, the reactive warrior, the one always ready for battle. Healing required me to lay down the armor, not completely, but consciously. To learn the difference between protection and reaction, to learn the difference between boundaries and walls, and to learn the difference between standing firm and fighting. As I continue observing my life, I saw how the distortions I grew up in shaped me. I saw how they followed me into adulthood, into relationships, into marriage, into family dynamics, into environments I chose, and I saw how unhealed wounds often recreate familiar experiences. The observer taught me that awareness is not about blaming our past. It's about understanding it. Understanding gives us a choice. Choice gives us freedom, and freedom allows us to create something different. Today, I still observe, I still reflect, I still recognize mistakes I have made, I still find places where I need to grow, because learning never stops, and neither does the growth. Because being human means being unfinished. And perhaps that is the beauty of this journey. It's not perfection, it's not certainty, but a willingness to continue learning, a willingness to continue healing, and a willingness to continue returning to the heart. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, remember, the knots we carry, we often tied long before we understood they existed. Healing begins when we become willing to gently untie them.